missing any lectures. All right, so where are we? We're talking this week about cognition in relationships, about how we think about relationships, which turns out to be really important, almost as important as what we do in relationships. And what we were saying at the time was that behaviors aren't necessarily concrete. They don't necessarily have an inherent meaning. Behaviors are ambiguous. Person looks at you, person stares at you, what does that mean? Well, we have to make that meaning a lot of times. And what I talked about last time was the idea that the meaning we make is affected by the knowledge we already have about relationships. And we went through that in great detail. But an implication of that idea was, or like that, the way I talked about it on Wednesday might have given you the impression that we have this knowledge and it totally determines the meanings that we make. If I think a certain way, I have a certain attachment style, I have a certain beliefs about relationships, that shapes the meaning that I make about a particular experience or behavior. In fact, though, what I want to talk about today is, a lot of times, we have a choice as to the meanings we make of our relationship experiences. And that's kind of the moral of today. The whole point of this lesson, I just gave it away. We actually often have a choice as to the meanings we make. Let me describe a little bit what I mean by making meaning. You have an experience. Somebody says something that doesn't strike you as sensitive. Someone says something like, oh, I don't like what you just said. And it stings. You have that experience. When I say making meaning, I mean, what global implications does that specific behavior have for you? Interpreting means linking a specific experience to a particular global meaning. So for example, a specific experience is you just said something that didn't strike me well, that hurt my feelings. You just criticized me. But there's several global meanings I can make of that. One global meaning is, you don't like me. You see how you don't like me is a much more general statement than you just criticized me. You just criticized me is concrete, it's specific. I can say that means I can link it to a global meaning. You don't like me. Or I can link it to a different global meaning. You must have had a bad day today. That's a more global meaning and a different global meaning that changes how I react to the specific thing. My point today is we often have some choice in how we do this. We have some flexibility. Now, last time I talked about how the existing knowledge that we have shapes the meanings we make, and it does. But today I want to talk about that choice thing. I want to emphasize a different aspect of this phenomenon of making meaning. And talk about the choices that we make, even if we don't always know we're making them. Let me give you an example of what I'm talking about here. We have a concrete behavior. Oh, my partner seems cold and distant today. Now, I can interpret that in a specific way. She must have had a bad day, or she does not care about me. And then I can interpret it even more globally, too. Well, if she must have had a bad day, then my global meaning is, gosh, what a hard-working partner I have. I feel great now. Or, oi, this is a terrible relationship with no affection in it at all. I feel bad now. These meanings were not inherent in this behavior. This behavior is concrete but ambiguous. The global meaning was a choice that I made. I had some degree of flexibility in whether I went down this path and interpreted the behavior in a way that increases my love, or whether I went down another path and interpreted the behavior in a way that decreases my love. I don't want to overstate the case. We'll talk about the limits of these choices. But for now, I want you to get a sense that there's some flexibility when a particular meaning happens. Now, in this example, I'm talking about making meaning of a behavior at one moment. But it may have struck you that over time, we can interpret the same behavior differently. And this, of course, happens all the time in relationships. Let me give you another example. Imagine you're with a partner who doesn't talk a lot, kind of hangs back, sort of stoic. Well, early on in a relationship, maybe you say, that's just what I like. The strong, silent type, a brooding loner, a rebel. Doesn't have to always express himself. He's so confident he doesn't have to talk. But you can imagine that that same interpretation can change over time. You can imagine a relationship that was declining, a relationship that was not going well, that same exact behavior, which does not change at all, could change its meaning to the perceiver. And I can say later, what did I ever see in this oblivious person who gives nothing back, never has a comment, never has something to say, doesn't seem interested in me. You imagine that in a lot of relationships, what changes isn't the concrete behavior. There's a researcher named Diane Felmley who has studied this process. She asks people in relationships that are just starting out, what's the thing that you love most about your partner? What quality in your partner do you love most? And then she asks the same people or other people in failed relationships, what qualities of your partner did you hate the most that contributed to the breakup of your relationship? And what she found was a lot of parallels in the two lists. A lot of times, the thing that attracted people to their relationships was the very thing that they pointed to later that said was a problem. All that changed was the meaning that they made of it. So you can, for example, saying, I really love that she's spontaneous and impetuous. Well, why did the relationship break up then? Because she was undependable and disorganized. You can imagine those being flip sides, different meanings of basically the same concrete behavior. I love that she was so affectionate, that she was so open with her emotions. Great. And why did the relationship end? Because she was so emotional and she made a big deal out about everything. Oh. You can imagine that the behaviors didn't change in those relationships, in these examples. What changed is the meaning we make of our relationships, of our specific experiences in relationships. Dr. Felmley calls these fatal attractions, when the thing that we're attracted to changes in our heads to the very thing that repels us from the person. So what does this mean for us? It's something worth thinking about. It's hard to keep in mind the fundamental ambiguity of specific experiences in relationships. But if we do keep in mind that any given experience can take on varying meanings, and the meanings matter, because of course our emotions and our behaviors are a reaction to the meanings we make, as we've been talking about in these examples, then we want to understand, why do we choose one meaning over another meaning in the moment? Why would we, given that a behavior can be interpreted in a lot of ways, why do we choose one meaning over another? What guides that meaning-making process? Put another way, what determines which global meanings we link to our specific experiences? Well, that's what I want to talk about. And one answer to that question of why we make particular meanings versus other meanings is that it may depend on our motives in the moment. A lot of times, we choose the meaning that fits our goals in the moment. And then the question is, well then, what are our goals? And how do our goals shape the meanings we make in relationships? And the ways we interpret our partner's behaviors in relationships? That's what I want to talk about for the next few minutes. Because if you think about it, what do we want to believe? I guess the question is, what do we want to believe about our relationships? What do we want to believe? And the first answer to that question, and indeed the first sort of motive that guides a lot of our meaning-making in relationships, is the motive to believe the best. And it makes sense, right? If you're in a relationship, you want to be confident in the relationship. If you've just said to somebody, hey, you're the one for me. It can be a marriage, obviously, but it can be any kind of relationship where you sort of say, you know what, I'm committing to. I want to show up with you on my arm. I want to introduce you to my friends. Well, if you've gone to that trouble, you're going to look pretty stupid if the relationship is a bad relationship. No. You don't want it to be a bad relationship. You want it to be a good relationship. You don't want to feel doubtful. That's an uncomfortable feeling. You want to think, this relationship that feels so good, it's a terrific relationship. That's a wonderful thing to feel, and you want to feel that way. We are all motivated to believe good things about our relationships. And so this motive, to the extent that it shapes our thinking, is called the enhancement bias. When I say bias, I mean it's a tendency to favor information that makes our relationship look good. There is a lot of research supporting this point. That people who are in relationships, especially people who are in good relationships, when given a choice between different kinds of meanings or between different kinds of information, strongly favor information that makes the relationship look good. We prefer information that supports and strengthens positive beliefs. Let me give you some examples. So this is all stuff that research has shown. That if you're in a good relationship, and I ask you, tell me about your partner. Tell me about that person you're in a good relationship. Tell me about the person you're in love with. And if I also talk to the person you're in love with and say, tell me about yourself, and I compare your ratings of your partner to your partner's ratings of him or herself, people tend to be much more positive about their partners than their partners are about themselves. Because I could say, oh, you know, I've got good points, I've got bad points, I'm klutzy in these ways. But if you're in love with somebody, you don't want to see the klutziness. Because that might cause doubts about the relationship, and that's unpleasant. We don't want that. So we tend to view our partners, describe our partners far more favorably than our partners describe themselves. In fact, we describe our partners more favorably than their friends describe them. So it's not just that outsiders see people more favorably than they see themselves. Our friends see us quite accurately. Our friends are not motivated to see us better than they see themselves because our friends aren't as interdependent with us, right? So think about your friends. People you like a lot. Do they have no flaws at all? Are they the best people ever? No. They're just your friends. You love them, but there's less motivation to deny that our friends have flaws or faults. But our partner, we're interdependent with our partner, right? My outcomes depend on my partner. So if my partner's got flaws, that's actually threatening. That can be threatening. And I don't like to live with threats. So in study after study, especially among college students, by the way, college students who are in love with their partners rate their partners higher than the friends of those partners rate the partner. The implication there is that there's a greater motive for the partner to see the best. A woman has done this well. Then the last example is, if you ask two people in a relationship, I love this work. There's been a couple studies that have done this. You ask two people in a relationship, what's your relationship like, and how likely is your relationship to last a year? The people in the relationship will tell you, oh, it's very likely, especially if they're in love or at the beginning of the relationship. It's highly likely. Then the researchers did something that I think is just mean. They went to the friends and family of the couple and asked them the same question. And the friends of the family didn't always agree with the couple, and then they followed them up a year later, and guess who was more likely to be right? The friends and family. Ouch. You do not want to know that information, but it's the truth. You don't want to believe that your mom knows whether your relationship's going to succeed better than you do. But that's what they found in the study. And why? Because the people in the relationship are highly invested in its success. What if I'm in a relationship, it's going great? Now, what if I contemplate the possibility of it failing? Ooh, I don't want that. That's going to be terrible. It's going to be embarrassing. It's going to be painful. There's going to be fights and crying. We'll have to decide whose t-shirts are whose. I do not want to consider that. I don't want to be prepared for that. I'm putting that out of my mind. I'm going to focus on the positive. But my mom has no such motivation. My mom wants what's best for me, and is thinking, that person isn't good for you, so your parents, your friends are much more honest. Or rather, your parents and friends are less motivated by an enhancement bias. There's nothing in it. They don't need to believe the best. And they tend to be actually better predictors of the future of the relationship. First, who's done a lot of this work is a woman named Sandra Murray. We talked about her on Wednesday as doing some work on self-esteem, and she did, and she also did this work. And her point is this, it's a very interesting point. She says, look, a relationship, an intimate relationship, really puts us in a bind. And the bind is this. We're close to somebody because they make us happy. But by opening ourselves up to them, by being close to them, we put them in a position to make us unhappy. We're vulnerable. The closer we are to somebody, the happier we let them make us, the more vulnerable we are to pain if the relationship doesn't work out. See, there's a tension there. I want to be close to somebody, but I also want to protect myself from pain. I don't want to be in a position where I might have my heart crushed and stopped. Sorry. So the point is that she says the enhancement bias helps protect us from the threat. It helps us put the threat out of our mind. We could never open ourselves up truly to another person if we were constantly thinking about the threat of having our hearts broken and stomped on. So we favor the information that says that's not going to happen. It makes sense. It makes a lot of sense. And people have shown this again and again, that we are highly motivated, especially early in the relationship. Now, and a lot of this work has been done on college students. Now imagine how much greater the motivation is for married couples. If college students, if there's someone you've been showing up at parties with, holding hands with, and then, hey, whatever happened to that person you're with? Oh, we broke up. Oh, sorry to hear it. But if you're married to somebody, now you've had a wedding, you've got toasters and blenders and monogram towels. If that relationship ends, it's more than embarrassing. You may have children. I mean, it can destroy your life, and of course, this divorce destroys many, many lives. So married couples are highly motivated to engage in this process, to make these choices. Two, when given a choice between an interpretation that makes me happy about the relationship and an interpretation of the same thing that makes me less happy, married couples are highly motivated to choose the enhancing interpretation. And this is one of our motives, to see the best. Melissa. That's true. And yet I'm not aware of strong gender differences in this. You see men and women doing it. Good question, Melissa. So we want to believe the best, but it's not the only thing we want to believe. That's not our only motive. People have talked about other motives in relationships that guide this meaning-making process. And one of them is the motive to be known. The motive to be understood by our partners. That's a different motive. In fact, it's a motive that sometimes operates in contrast to the motive we just talked about. The idea is this: not only do we want to be confident, but we also want to be in control. We don't want to be surprised. It doesn't feel good to think, I don't know what's coming next. And you can imagine through our evolutionary history, it would be adaptive, highly adaptive, to have an accurate sense of what's going on. Especially in intimate relationships, it doesn't feel good to have someone say, oh, please, I'm looking forward to that gourmet meal you're going to cook for all of our friends if you are not a gourmet cook and don't know what to do in the kitchen. You're going to disappoint. Better to have our partners know us, and better to know our partners accurately. The researcher who's highly associated with research on this is a fellow named William or Bill Swann. S-W-A-N-N. He's at the University of Texas at Austin. And he identified what he called a bias not for enhancement, not for believing the best at all costs, but for verification. And he put it this way. He says, how do I want my partner to think of me? How do I want my partner to think of me? Do I want my partner to say, you are the best. You are the perfect basketball player, soldier, gourmet cook, everything you do is perfect, even if that's not all true? Or do you want your partner to know you? To know exactly what your strengths and weaknesses are? Bill Swann said, we want our partners to know us. And we want to know our partners accurately, even if that means knowing the flaws. That's quite different from the enhancement bias. The enhancement bias argues, we want to know the best. We want to know the positive stuff no matter what. The verification bias says, no, there are times when accurate information is highly desirable. Now the question is, well, when do we want to just know positive things, and when do we want to know accurate things? And a lot of research shows that transition points in relationships are very key times when this motive becomes a big deal. So, what's a transition point? Well, the transition point is after date number 1, for example. Okay, you've gone, someone set you up. Someone said, oh, you got to meet this person. Okay, you go on a date. You're not in a relationship yet. You just went on one date. Now you've got a choice to make. Is there going to be a second date? You have a choice to make at the end of the date. Are you going to exchange phone numbers or are you going to say, yeah, I'll call you? What is it going to be? Well, you have to base that decision on something. This is when you want accurate information. In fact, now there's other transition points, of course, which is, now you've been together for a long time. What's going to happen next? Are you going to move in together? Are you going to get married? Are you going to introduce each other to each other's family, which is a big step? Or not? Well, how are you going to make those decisions? That's when you find people not necessarily motivated to believe the best, but motivated to figure out what's going on. In fact, at that point, there's a bias called the diagnosticity bias. I love the diagnosticity bias because it describes many films by Woody Allen. And the bias is simply this. It's a belief, you favor information that you think is diagnostic. You favor information that you think reveals deeper truths about the relationship. What makes it a bias is sometimes that information doesn't really reveal anything. But there's a tendency to think maybe it is revealing. So, when people who are thinking, should we get married or break up? Should we get married or is that it? Like, what should we do? Should we move forward or end it? You find them saying, uh-oh, we just had a fight. What's that mean? It's not diagnostic. Does that mean that we're in a good relationship or a bad relationship? You get these people starting to ruminate and think hard about what the meaning of different events is. There's a great scene in a film called Swingers. You ever see the film Swingers? Yeah, a couple people? Well, there's a scene in the film where after having met an attractive person, the lead guy calls her up afterwards and leaves a message on her phone. And if you're already probably giggling if you've seen the film, because what happens is he leaves a message and he starts talking too much and it gets cut off. So he calls back and starts apologizing for the last one because he thinks that she'll interpret his being cut off the first time as she'll think he hung up or something like that. So, but then he's cut off again. So the point is that over the course of like a 10-minute scene, he keeps calling her back, thinking that she's interpreting his messages in a very serious way. Finally, in his last message, and by the way, she's not been part of this at all. It's just been him talking to the message machine. And the last one, he says, I think this isn't working out. And he's just interpreted he's given so much meaning to these messages that he's already convinced himself the relationship's over. Heidi. Yes, absolutely. That would be totally. If you tell your friend, oh, you're overanalyzing, you might also say, oh, you're suffering from the diagnosticity bias. You're seeing too much meaning in behaviors that aren't necessarily diagnostic. You can imagine, here's another example of the diagnosticity bias. This is a perfect example of the diagnosticity bias. Let's say you have a crush on the person who serves coffee at Starbucks. So you go in and you go up to the counter and you say, hi, I'd like my latte. And the person says, okay, and you say, here's my credit card, and they say, okay, and they hand it back to you, and they say, okay, Mr. Carney, or maybe they'll even call you by your first name, Ben, and then you say, oh, they know my first name. They must be paying attention to me. I must be a special customer, because why would she call me by my first name? Now, of course, it is right there on your credit card most of the time. So that would be an example of the diagnosticity bias. If there's someone you like, and they sort of like say, oh, can you pass the salt? And you're like, oh, they talked to me. That would be another example of the diagnosticity bias. Danielle.
So this one is something that's both ways. We want our partners to know us and we must know that.
Yes. We want to know our partners accurately. That's the diagnosticity bias. And we want to be known. That's the verification bias. The verification bias is I want people to know me. Now, a lot of times, the verification bias and the enhancement bias can go hand in hand. For example, if you've got high self-esteem, if you think that you're pretty hot stuff, then wanting your partner to like you and wanting your partner to know you is the same thing. Because you think if your partner knows you, they will like you because you think you have good qualities. Nice work if you can get it. Robbie?
But sometimes seems to bother us when our partners know us, like when they say, I know you, you're stubborn. No, I'm not, you don't know.
Oh, well, wait a minute. Wait a minute, so Robbie, you contradict yourself. You said it bothers us when our partners know us, but then the example you gave was your partner saying you're stubborn. You're like, no, I'm not stubborn. Well, what's irritating you is not being known. What's irritating you is, in that example, at least as you describe it, Robbie, is when someone says that you're stubborn, you're like, no, I deny that. What irritates me is you're calling me stubborn, that's not me, I don't recognize myself then. The problem is, what about people who are stubborn? Or worse, poor people who are depressed. Now, why is depression a really bad disease? It's one of the reasons it's a really bad disease is it really has significant negative effects on interpersonal relationships. And this is another example. If we have a bias to be known, if we want our partners to know us, and if it makes us irritated in the same way as Robbie's example, to be misunderstood, if we don't like to be misunderstood, then what if you have low self-esteem? What if you're depressed? What if you think poorly of yourself? If you have a verification bias, now that would operate against an enhancement bias. Now, in people who are depressed, if the verification bias is true, would actually get their partners to think worse of them. Would actually be trying to convince their partners to think poorly of them because that's how they think of themselves, and they want their partners to know them. Let me tease apart the psychology here. If you have low self-esteem, you think poorly of yourself. What's the threat? The threat is that your partner will discover it and then reject you. That if your partner likes you, your partner must be fooled, must not know you well enough to know all the negative qualities that you have. So you're constantly in this state of doubt, always wondering, when are they going to discover the truth and finally turn me out? So you can't trust your partner's love if you are depressed and have these feelings. The only way that you can begin to trust your partner's love is by knowing that your partner actually knows you. So you're in a position of saying, wait a minute, the only way I can trust that you love me is to know that you love me despite all of my many, many flaws. I need to know that you know those flaws. So depressed people do a lot of self-verifying, a lot of reminding their partners of how negative they are. At the same time, and this is interesting, at the same time that depressed people are seeking out negative behavior from their partners, let me give you an example of the way this research is done. I give you a list of 10 questions, and I say, you can give this list, you can choose 5 questions from this list and have your partner answer them about you. Half the questions are questions that are phrased to elicit positive information. Like, what are your 3 favorite things about this person? What do you enjoy most about this person's company? That's a positive question. The answer is going to be a nice thing. I'm going to enjoy that. It's going to be positive. The negative questions would be, what are your partner's 3 biggest flaws? What are the things about your partner